And Professor Fazaeli is an established professor of law and Islamic studies at the Irish Centre for Human Rights, University of Galway. Her extensive research explores women's rights in Iran, the intersections of human rights and religion, and the evolving landscape of Islamic feminism. She currently leads a prestigious European Research Council funded project titled Bilkis, building conceptual and methodological expertise for the study of gender, agency, and authority in Islam, and is also part of the Marie Curie Actions project examining the nature of hate in society. Beyond academia, Professor Fazaeli plays a vital role in advocacy and leadership, serving as the chairperson of the Eminent Council of Ireland, chairperson of Iran Academia, deputy chair of the board for Frontline Defenders, and the board member of Scholars at Risk Europe. Previously, she was professor in Islamic civilizations at Trinity College Dublin, where she was also a fellow of the college and the warden of Trinity Hall. Her career reflects a remarkable commitment to advancing scholarship, social justice, and global solidarity. Professor Fazaeli, I've particularly been interested in your paper titled Female Religious Authority in Muslim Majority Context, Past Examples and Modern State Initiatives that you presented at the Newman Lab 2021-22. So it's been an honor to invite you here at the center. Thank you, Dr. Roja. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much for that really generous introduction, particularly for a Saturday morning. So thank you, and also thank you so much to all of you for organizing this. It's a really important topic, and it's always good to re-engage. Also, I know Dr. Amina Hussein was in contact with me, so her patience as well, while I responded to her emails at very slow pace. So I'm going to talk today about this paper that is actually ongoing. I have to explain that this is something that came out of questions that came up while we were doing field research as part of the Belghis project. The title is Islam and Iranian Women's Identities in Iran and the Diaspora. Just actually before I start, I was told 40 to 45 minutes. Is that correct for the paper? Yes. Okay. Or do you want me, or do you prefer more discussion time? Okay, I'll go with
Professor
40.
Roja, you take your time, but we will have a Q&A at the end.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you. So this paper explores the various ways in which Iranian women, both inside and outside of Iran, are navigating national, religious, and gendered identities, particularly in the wake of the 2022 Women Life Freedom Protest, Zan Zendegi Azadi, or Kurdish original Jin Jian Azadi. In so doing, it seeks to revisit and critically engage Miriam Cook's theorization of the collective identity marker Muslim woman, a discursive construct that, as Cook argues, emerges at the intersection of gender and religiosity to signify a unified, though highly contested subject position. While Cook identifies a spectrum of responses to this label, ranging from a strategic embrace to deliberate rejection, this paper suggests within contemporary Iranian and Iranian diasporic contexts, the process of disidentification has intensified. Here, what is being rejected is not merely the Muslim woman identity per se, but any affiliative identification with Islam as a cultural, political, or epistemological framework in the first instance. So to give this current research some context, in previous work, I conducted qualitative fieldwork in Iran in 2003, 2004, and later in 2010. So this was in the context of my book that came out in 2017 on Iranian feminisms. In the last instance, interviews were conducted online, mainly by Skype, as I actually haven't been able to travel back to Iran since 2004 due to my human rights activism. The focus of these earlier studies was to investigate Islamic feminist discourses, identities, and definitions in Iran amongst Iranian women's rights activists. When conducting research in Iran in 2003 and 2004, I found it helpful to devise a rubric of feminist types as a way of ordering and making sense of the women's movement in Iran at the time. So the types I identified were Islamic state feminist, Islamic non-state feminist, Muslim feminists, and secular feminists. I won't go into definitions here. So in 2010, I conducted 30 additional interviews with Iranian women's rights activists to supplement and update the earlier work. In the interviews, some of the interviewees identified themselves as either Islamic or secular feminists. I have to say Islamic feminists was very, very few. Only one person who was a parliament member identified themselves not even as Islamic feminists, but Muslim feminists. Others disagreed with such categorization, stating that these were labels primarily used by academics which had become politicized. Some of the interviews offered other descriptive labels such as radical, socialist, liberal, modern thinker no andish, or pragmatist amalgara feminists. As those of you who work in this field, you'd know that there is a struggle in some ways to define Islamic feminism. In her lecture at the University of Bonn, Miriam Cook reminded us that when Arab Muslim women use the word feminism, it is very, very important to them that feminism be disentangled from white feminism. She further observed that some women reject the term altogether, perceiving it as a Western construct implicated in colonial histories of knowledge and power. Yet Cook insists on the significance of holding on to the term, not as a fixed ideological position, but, in her words, an attitude, a frame of mind that highlights the role of gender in understanding the organization of society. I agree with Cook that feminism provides the analytical tools for assessing how expectations for men's and women's behavior have led to unjust situations, particularly, but not necessarily only for women. So in Iran, where the term lacks a direct Persian equivalent, feminism is sometimes framed as a Western import. At least it used to be when I was doing the field work. Yet the activists I interviewed did not reject the term, rather they deployed it strategically, recognizing its value both as an analytical lens and as a mean of articulating gendered critiques of hierarchies of power. Embracing feminism enabled them to address questions of justice, agency, and social organization, even within contexts shaped by male, religious, and state authorities. By contrast, the label Islamic feminism was frequently problematized, as I will discuss. Since it found currency in the 1990s, the term Islamic feminism has been defined in diverse ways across different contexts. I contend that no homogeneous definition of the term exists and that it is not desirable to attempt to apply a single definition to all contexts. Margot Badran suggests that one way we can think of Islamic feminism is as a feminist discourse and practice articulated with an Islamic paradigm, which derives its understanding and mandate from the Quran, seeks right and justice for women and for men in the totality of their existence. According to Badran, Islamic feminist discourse is grounded in the Quran and other religious texts. Badran's definition of Islamic feminism is predicated on engagement of the scholar with a sacred text. This is the most common understanding of the term Islamic feminism conveyed in literature produced in the past 20 years. However, I argue that the Iranian version of Islamic feminism differs from Badran's definition. Although the discourse of Islamic feminism in Iran is certainly articulated within the framework of Islam, It is grounded more in political Islam than in any attempt to exegete the Quranic text through an egalitarian lens. So if we take Badran's definition of Islamic feminism, then Islamic feminism in Iran would not be a significant category. Although historically, there have been a number of female mujtahidas in Iran, their work remain largely unknown, and their exegetical works do not always represent an egalitarian or feminist interpretation of the Quran and the Sunnah. It is important to be clear not only about the context and history against which we theorize the meaning of Islamic feminism, but also about the role that Iranian politics and revolutionary ideals have played in forming the identities of the women and men who are now feminists in Iran. As one of the people I interviewed stated, in reality, one can say no one with such a label is active in Iran. Those who may be known as Islamic feminists do not use this title themselves. Certainly, there are those who pay attention to the fabric of an Islamic society in their activism and, for example, call themselves Muslim feminists. However, the use of this title is not common in Iran. Those referred to are in general reformist women who themselves believe in Islam and who attempt to interpret Islam in a way that would help equality of men and women. The people I interviewed emphasized numerous times that Islamic feminists do not constitute a homogeneous group. Rather, they come from a variety of cultural, regional, socioeconomic, and educational backgrounds. Similarly, Ziba Mir Hosseini has stated, in her words, like other feminists, their positions are local, diverse, multiple, and evolving. For other scholars, such as Nair Tohidi, Islamic feminism has emerged primarily in cities amongst highly educated middle-class Muslim women who are unwilling to break away from their religious orientation and hold Islam as a significant component of their ethnic, cultural, or even national identity. Islamic feminism in Iran, as expressed in this manner, does not depend solely or primarily on rigorous engagement with a text. Yet again, Hala Afshar observes that among women activists in Muslim majority countries, none have been as successful as those who have located their political action in the context of Islam and its teachings. She reasons that since the Islamic Republic of Iran prides itself on its adherence to what it defines as Islamic values, then the believers have been better able to engage in positive discussion and extract Islamic measures which are liberating. This meshes well with Mir Hosseini's contention that after the 1979 Islamic Revolution, there emerged, again in her words, a gendered discourse that is feminist in its aspiration and demands, yet is Islamic in its language and source of legitimacy. So the bulk of all this kind of previous scholarship continues to help us focus on critically analyzing everyday acts of resistance related to the ongoing woman life freedom movement. And I would also suggest that emerging research from the Belghis ERC project that I'm leading may be helpful in such an analysis as well. So Belghis, or building conceptual and methodological expertise for the study of gender agency and authority in Islam, emerges from a critical concern around Muslim women's access to justice in Europe. The project engages in a comparative study of how Muslim women in Europe have navigated agency and authority over time and across diverse European peripheries. So we are specifically focusing on the countries Bosnia, Herzegovina, Bulgaria, and Greece, including Ottoman and post-Ottoman influences, and placing these contexts in conversation with the national context of Sweden, Norway, and Ireland. Belghis studies how the gendered development of Islamic family laws in each of these national frameworks can be better understood by investigating how ideas and practices of social, religious, and legal authority have been constituted or have changed over time. So the Belqis project is comprised of 4 work packages. And one of the work packages, work package 3, studies Muslim women's access to justice, specifically through the lens of women's agentic equality. And this is done in terms of critical comparison with positions of gender complementarity that have been articulated in popular and state-based formulations of Islamic law. So by running this work package in 3 countries where standards of women's rights and women's equality enjoy relatively strong legal and social protections, namely Ireland, Sweden, and Norway, we hope to produce new knowledge about the lived reality of women's lives, whose legal and social protections are impacted by their associational status with Islam. Whether such as identity is perceived, positively embraced, or imposed. Specifically, we are looking at how women with experiences of Islamic family laws in Northern Atlantic region have navigated systems of justice, including textual and practical aspects of state and socio-religious authority. So by foregrounding the gender dimensions of Islamic family laws in relation to systems of justice in these states, we hope to learn how the states in question treat Islamic family laws and related structures in practical terms. i.e., are there policies for how to recognize or engage with local, national, or transnational Muslim religious authorities? Where specific aspects of Islamic family laws, for example, mahr or practice, are they regulated or they have any form of legal recognition? If so, how does this relate practically or theoretically to national frameworks for gender equality? And finally, how does the presence of Muslim women's organizations in each country impact the regulation and reform of family law and related processes, such as mediation, arbitration, and alternative dispute resolution? So this is where we started seeing some challenges. In Sweden and Norway, we are conducting our interviews primarily through Persian language and English language interviews. And these are led by my colleague, Dr. Tiba Boniad, who is focusing her research on migrant communities from Iran and Afghanistan, as well as Swedish and Norwegian participants with family or generational links to the Persianate world. So one of the early challenges we have encountered is that some of the Iranian women we have contacted for interviews declined to participate. I have to say it's more than some, so many have declined that we actually then said, okay, we need to come and think about our methodology and even how we are defining the category Muslim women. The response was often some variation on the statement, this research does not concern us because we are not Muslims. What surprised us was not the rejection of a Muslim identity, but the intensity of the response, which often left no room for dialogue. This was particularly striking when such reactions came from individuals within our own intellectual or peer circles, even actually some from Iranian feminist circles. Such responses have in turn prompted us to reconsider aspects of our methodology and also to critically reflect on our own definitions and assumptions surrounding the category of Muslim woman. For me, there is a clear shift observable in Iranian women's relationship to Islam since I last conducted interviews. In my earlier research, none of the activists I interviewed rejected Islam or Islamic identity outright. In fact, some even found engaging in a positive and gendered discussion of Islam to be liberating. And this was the case even for those who would have regarded themselves as secular feminists. For example, Mehrangiz Kar, who has a few books on Sida and Islamic law. She herself would be known as a secular feminist, but she engaged in a discussion of Islam as liberating. So in contrast, not only did some of the Iranian women we contacted in Norway and Sweden reject an Islamic identity, but they also viewed Islam itself as the main source of oppression and a barrier to women's emancipation. Negative perceptions of Islam as a religio-political system amongst Iranians, both within Iran and in the diaspora, are of course not new, nor are anti-Muslim, anti-clerical, or related anti-Arab sentiments uncommon. In her book, Say What Your Longing Heart Desires, Women, Prayer, Poetry in Iran, Nilufar Haeri makes the following observations about fieldwork in Iran, which she conducted between 2008 and 2016. The degree of intolerance that I witnessed on the part of secular Iranians towards their religious compatriots in the course of fieldwork for this book was an eye-opener. They often expressed cynicism and spoke of Islam as the source of all our problems. So as Bilqis' fieldwork progresses, I find myself increasingly aware that such forms of cynical expression, which presume a binary religious secular framework for problem resolution, need to be more carefully addressed within our research program. In August 2021, Afghanistan fell to the Taliban. And in the weeks that followed, I was invited to participate in several academic panels, including one at Trinity College Dublin, where I was working at the time. So a recurring question at each event related to the status of Afghan women under Taliban rule and the protection of women's rights. It was, in essence, the old hackneyed debate on whether Afghan women needed to be saved. A year later, in September 2022, at the height of the protests in Iran, I in turn contacted some of the same academics who had invited me to speak on panels about Afghanistan with an eye to organizing an event to address the Jina Mahsa movement. So actually, to my surprise, this proved to be a difficult event to organize, and many of the same individuals who had been centrally involved in the response to Afghanistan declined to participate in the context of Iran. When I probed, I was told that the uprising was too political and they were unsure how to support such a panel without appearing Islamophobic. After all, Iranian women were on the streets burning their hijabs. At that moment, it became clear to me that there were some updates that needed to be made to the complex considerations, understandings, and misunderstandings of women's agency at work in relation to Islam and Muslim identity. Why was it easier, at a time more acceptable within Irish academic and political circles, I wondered, to speak out about the oppression of women in Afghanistan, while at the same time it was difficult to find voices to address the work Iranian women and supporters were doing to resist the brute coercion of the Islamic State, to use Ali Reza Bojani and Morgan Clark's phrase. So a growing body of research is challenging the long-standing stereotype of Iran as a predominantly Shia Muslim society. So like if you look at kind of the scholarship on this, usually it says 95% of Iranians are Shia. Particularly noteworthy is the chapter Secular Religious Divide by Pouyan Tamimi Arab and Amar Maleki, which presents data from groundbreaking survey conducted by the Group for Analyzing and Measuring Attitudes in Iran, called GAMAN, in June 2020. The survey, based on approximately 40,000 adult respondents residing in Iran, found that only 32% of participants identified as Shia Muslims. In contrast, 22 identified as religiously unaffiliated nuns, 9% as atheist, 8% as spiritual but not religious, and 6% as agnostic. Smaller groups included 0.5% identifying as Baha'i, 0.1% identifying as Jews. As the surveyors themselves note, inevitably sampling bias and the absence of the illiterate population affected the results. But the stark disparity with the image of a homogeneous Muslim nation is too significant to ignore. Strikingly, in this survey, 8% identified as Zoroastrian, an identification attributed more to cultural nationalism and symbolic reclamation of pre-Islamic heritage than to active membership in the small ethno-religious Zoroastrian community. And in separate research, Ana Maria Gomez Rayet Parvar has also noted that incidences of Christian conversion in Iran are often framed as a rupture from Islam. The rise of such alternative religious affiliations and secular identities appears to reflect a broader process of societal transformation in Iran and aligns with broader scholarly observations of a profound secularization in post-revolutionary Iran. Indeed, other statistics from the Gaman survey indicates that 47% of the Iranian population reported having lost their religion. 60% reported they do not pray. 68% claimed that religious prescriptions should be excluded from state legislations, even if believers hold a parliamentary majority. And 71% claimed that religious institutions should be responsible for their own funding. As early as 1998, Azadekian argued that the Islamic Republic was facing a legitimacy crisis due to the failure of political Islam. More recent analysis by scholars such as Mahmoud Pargu, Arash Qajarjazi, Mansour Muaddel, Tamimi Arab, Maliki further make arguments for an ongoing process of secularization. However, the term secularization itself is not used uniformly either. So in some works, the term appears to denote decline in religiosity or a move away from religion. In others, it refers to a withdrawal from the organizational religious structures of institutional Shiism. In others, again, secularization is used as a synonym for the categorical separation of religion and state. Nor is the problem entirely with defining the secular. As Pargu argues, though the revolution was successful in imposing Islamic morality on the larger segment of society, this Islam became so mellow and shallow and vacuous that for some it barely satisfied the definition of Islam. Thus, we see that Islam itself is also a contested term in these analyses. As I have often reminded my first-year students, there is no single homogeneous definition of Islam. And in Shahab Ahmad's words, the greatest challenge to a coherent conceptualization of Islam has been posed by the sheer diversity of, that is, range of difference between those societies, persons, ideas, and practices that identified themselves with Islam. It is because Islam is practiced in such a diverse ways across different cultural and geographical contexts that expressions of Muslimness which fall outside normative definitions can also be invaluable in challenging and expanding social assumptions and political responses to religious practice. So in interviews conducted for this paper, and I have to say this is still ongoing, so we are still developing this. And this is for the Belqis project. A number of participants highlighted what Ha'eri terms as the Islamic State's production of Homo Islamicus citizenry. One interview participant indicated that she had to challenge her family's notion of only one Islam. So in her words, they had accepted that only one form of mazhab exists. Other interviewees highlighted the different practices of Muslimness in today's Iran. For instance, consider the following testimony. The interviewee says, Irfan in Iran is a real story. Sufism has become a huge phenomenon. My sister who lives in Iran considers herself Sufi. She drinks alcohol, then reads the Quran and prays. My sister also considers herself Muslim. She says, I'm incredibly Muslim. Another recent interviewee, a woman in her early 40s, defined her religiosity in the following way. I still consider myself as a Muslim and somehow a practicing Muslim because I fast, I do my prayers, but I don't know. It is more like in a spiritual way because at the same time, I pick and choose. You know what I mean. I'm saying, okay, now this rule is, for example, bullshit, and I just don't want to comply with that. And the other is, no, I'm happy with it. For example, I think it's more like a spiritual practice where I keep my sanity. Maybe it helps me. In response to the question of whether her relationship with religiosity has changed since the Women Life Freedom movement, the same interviewee responded that although her spirituality remains unchanged, she and many of her friends who would be practicing Muslims, and some of them come from what we call Aghazadeh families, those are who are close to the state or are still within the state apparatus, have distanced themselves from the statist Islam. She indicated that many, including herself, also removed their headscarves after the Jina movement. In her words, I think the Mahsa movement gave us the courage to do that. Just on an anecdotal note, there is somebody else that I'm planning to interview soon. This person actually is also outside Iran, wears the headscarf and wears it as, you know, if you were to stereotype, you would say somebody who's practicing would wear it. And I had a conversation with her, haven't done the interview yet. And she said, you know, after the Jina movement, I haven't prayed. I haven't been able to. You know, I still have to interview her, but I think that actually makes an interesting contrast to this interview that I just talked about. So yet practically in diasporic context, one can be openly critical of or vehemently opposed to practices and ideas within Islam, even the practices and idea of Islam itself, and still be racialized as Muslim by the state or society. So one of the interview participants, a female academic in her late 40s, talked about her sense of being racialized when living outside of Iran. For me, I get very upset if someone perceives me as Muslim. For me, this is racialization. Only yesterday, an acquaintance told me, I have a friend from Bosnia and he's also Muslim like you. This led to a huge argument. She continued. This racialization, I see it a lot in ordinary people, but I also encountered this in academia. She explained that often due to her lack of adherence to a stereotypical Iranian Islam, she was told within academic circles, I have not seen an Iranian like you. You're not a typical Iranian. Another interviewee talked about this racialization as follows. I would say I am a non-religious person, but if I am talking to a white person, probably I would say I'm a non-practicing Muslim, or I also do sometimes bring up this Shia thing, but it really depends on the context. But again, I think it's very contextual based on the setting for me, because I'm also agnostic, to be honest. But I should say, because when I was in Iran, I would always consider myself as an anti-religion person and wouldn't consider myself as, I do not even consider myself religious even here, but I thought I was much more in a radical sense. That means she thought of herself as not religious in a radical sense. I would refuse any form of religious association. But when I moved to Brussels, it was just so weird for me because people would just assume I'm Muslim, you know? They would ask me, okay, are you practicing? They would just assume because I'm from Iran. It's very complicated, you know? For example, I remember there was this guy from Egypt who had some very weird ideas about Shiaism and was like attributing these ideas to me. And then I thought, I'm a representative from the Shia community and I need to defend this. which I never had done in my own country. You know, I always hated everything about that. But then when I'm living in Europe, I was in a position to defend things that I didn't even like. In another one of the interviews conducted in Sweden, an interviewee talked about how she did not attend the Imam Ali Mosque in Stockholm as frequently after the women life freedom movement. She added that it was not just herself, but nearly all her circles of friends that had distanced themselves from the mosque as they were finding it too political. So this is both kind of in terms of surveillance, state surveillance, but also in that particular mosque, the imam was actually sent back to Iran by the Swedish state. So they were kind of two-sided securitization of this space. This, sorry, I'm just going to take a bit of a sip of a tea. This accords with Muaddel's assertion that mosque attendance is an important dimension of the public side of religion and a key indicator of the religiosity of the public. It also intersects with Muaddel's statistical analysis that Iranian mosque attendance is less frequent than that of citizens of other Muslim majority countries. In some of the more recent interviews, religious or spiritual Shia Muslim women have distanced themselves from state institutions. But equally important to note is the way that distancing is also happening as a reaction to racialization perceived or experienced in diasporic states and social context. Another important and interesting finding is our interviews with both Iranian and Afghan women, mostly in the Swedish context, has been that nearly all of our interviewees state that they are not mughallad of any Shia marja taqlid. Some of the practicing women told us explicitly that particularly when it comes to family and women's issues, there is no reason to go to a male cleric for advice. Indeed, with some there is preference to ask for lay professional advice. This is actually interesting. In Ireland, we are looking not only at Iranian and Afghan women, it's kind of more diverse Muslim community. And similarly in Ireland, when it comes to family and women's issues, the women prefer to go to other women rather than go to, for example, imam of a mosque. But as you know, like within Shiism is a little bit different because you have one marja, and their treatise is quite important in your practice. So the combination of waning mosque attendance and the diminishing authority of marjaiyat are indications of a crisis within traditional and statist religious authority. Research on anti-Muslim sentiments in Europe over the past 2 decades has demonstrated that both Muslim and non-Muslims who are stereotyped on the basis of national, linguistic, and cultural characteristics have been targets of Islamophobia. And this form of racialization is also evident in our preliminary case studies. Such as imposition or assumption of being adjacent to or affiliated with Islamic religio-cultural discourses complicates any premise of self-identification. That is to say, the elegant solution of defining a Muslim as a person who identifies as Muslim is untenable against othering discourses in European context, which may contest or simply ignore negated identities. This deprives individuals of the very agency they often also feel is lost in the Muslim majority state-directed Islamic governance currently found in Iran and Afghanistan. Thus, even when migrants and individuals identified with acts of migration from Iran and Afghanistan repudiate Islam as an organizing or motive factor in personal terms, it does not automatically follow that they receive social discharge from ongoing debates around Islam and its influence in national politics. No wonder then that the rejection of Muslim identity and the no to participating in a project exploring the influence and standing of Islamic family laws in Europe has often been so sharp amongst the Iran and Afghanistan-related participants we have approached. And this is also in line with the Islamophobic sentiments displayed by segments of Iranian diasporic communities during and after the Jina uprising. The conflation of religious practice and identity with Islamic state interpretations and frameworks is obviously widespread. But significantly, opposition to the regime is not limited to secular individuals. Tamimi Arab and Maliki observe that even devout and practicing Shia Muslims have joined the protests. Videos of veiled women standing in solidarity with unveiled women challenge the simplistic binary of secular versus religious. As they write, perhaps these protests should not be viewed as a conflict between secular and religious citizens, but rather as a struggle between democratic and undemocratic forces. So this raises a complex and unresolved question. How can one protest against the Islamic regime and call for a secular state, yet speak meaningfully about Muslim identity? So going back to Miriam Cook, she asserts, veiled or not, the Muslim woman has become the cultural standard for the Ummah, or collective Muslim society worldwide. With the Women Life Freedom Movement, can one see the unraveling of the Muslim woman? The unveiled women protesters rose up not only against a brutal Islamic state, but also against the Muslim woman as the chador-cladded emblem of the state. The widespread mistrust of the Islamic State and its statist Islam appear to have transformed the moral economy. No longer can a regime claiming piety, yet devoid of legitimacy, dictate and monitor women's appearances and behavior as a marker of social order. So as this is ongoing research, I end with a question. Has the moral economy of research on Muslim women also been similarly transformed? So thank you for your patience. Sorry that my voice is going, but so I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. That was amazing. Uh, can I shoot first? Sorry. Yeah. Uh, Roja, you must have experienced this. When we talk about Islam and Muslim women, it becomes a very tricky and complex question. Because, you said that Islam is not one, but many, as many of them in their interviews sort of argued. But we tend to sort of conflate many different things, many different strands, and so that perhaps results in this kind of confusion, that either Islam has to be one, or which means all Muslims have to be identical one, or there is no one Islam. Muslims can be different. Still, there can be one Islam. Islam is set of belief, and as everyday practice. So when it comes to everyday practice, Muslims are as diverse as the cultures to which they belong. And as basic set of belief, then Islam still remains the same, 5 times prayers and so on. So there are some basic tenets beyond which everyday practices vary, from culture to culture, from political context, one, and also within the same location, at different points in different, temporal junctures, it can vary, it can be different, depending on the political context, the social context, and the changing, everything, the changing dynamics within which they're there. So that is one thing that I would like you to reflect on. Secondly, Faisal Devji, I mean, this is a book that I mentioned yesterday also, and I find the argument very fascinating. Not that I agree with it entirely, but still, worth looking at. And because I also admire Faisal Devji's writing so much, Faisal Devji has come up with this book very recently, which is called A Modern History of Muslim Gender. And there he argues that in 19th century Islam emerged as a protagonist, etc., etc. And then he says that recent trends reflect that now Islam has declined from its position as a protagonist, and therefore, Muslim women who had to be, symbol or emblem of Islam, mainly through the sartorial practices and the comportment, that is no longer there. And he gives example of this Iran, the movement that you've been talking about, women life and freedom movement, 2022. And he says that in that movement, or in India, women were not using the language where they had to refer to Islam or gender. They were rather using other reference points like minority rights, so citizenship and other things. So he says that these protests, they represented a politics in which women had escaped both kinds of authority and identity, the rubric of Islam or the rubric of patriarchy and gender. So would you like to comment on both these aspects? Yes. You'll have to unmute yourself.
You have to unmute yourself. You're muted.
He's not able to, I think.
Okay. Vaibhav, are you in the...
Oh, I
Please.
can now. Sorry,
Yeah,
it was saying the host has to unmute you. Sorry. Thank you so much for both comment and question. And actually, I have to say to everyone in the audience as well, I would appreciate constructive comments, because this is ongoing research. So we are still grappling with some of it. So I do agree with you that with the everyday practice of Islam, and to be honest, we have grappled with this because like the whole team, it's 8 of us now. When we were going to the field, we sat down and said, okay, how do you define Muslim woman? Like how do we, how do you find these participants? And we had said, okay, we'll go with those who identify themselves, because we are not imposing identity on anyone. And then when we came up with this challenge that we were getting so many no's, and I have to explain as well, the no's were not always like to people who we wanted to interview. We would email someone and say, somebody introduced us to basically gave us your name, and we know you work within this field. Could you put us in touch with some other people? This is our project. And they would come back and say, because they see Islam or Muslim women in it, they would come back and say, well, we are not Muslims. We don't identify with this project. We cannot help you. Like it's to that level. And so I started talking to some people, especially those feminists who I had, some of those who I had even interviewed for my first project. And this everyday practice came up. So some of them were saying, well, there has to be that everyday practice to identify yourself as a practicing Muslim. But then others would say, well, there are cultural practices as well. So it's not that there's the 5 pillars and that's it, but culturally as well, you could identify yourself as Muslim. But then another interesting, because I only gave you snippets of some of the interviews. In some of the interviews, somebody would come and say, I am not Muslim. I don't see myself Muslim at all. And then slowly we start to talk, and they're like, but I prefer to eat halal meat, or I really enjoy kind of Sufi music that really lifts my soul. And when you got in depth, you realize, how complex these identities are, and very much, at least at the moment, I think this kind of vehement kind of no to this Muslim woman identity or even category Islam is really to that statist, that coercive Islam that Iranian women and Afghan women have experienced, which actually has put has made Islam into the one. And this is the other thing as well in Iran after the Islamic Revolution, Islam became kind of more public than private as well, and that public surveillance of Islam as well kind of pushed some people against it. So that's kind of for the first, but again, like, as I said, I really actually appreciate, I didn't know about the book, and I will go and read it. But I do agree as well on the woman life freedom movement actually was really interesting because it was quite intersectional as well. So it brought together intersections of race, ethnicity, gender, religion. You had Shias, the Baluch Sunnis. You had the whole or Zanjian Azadi. The slogan came from Kurdistan. So I do agree with all your comments, really, and I will look at that book as well.
Yeah, I think the limitation in the project that you are doing or all such projects is that there is an expectation that you will arrive at this conclusive definition of identity. But it is not possible. And for example, if I give my example, I call myself a practicing Muslim, so does everyone else in my family. But if we really look at each other, we are so different. I don't observe parda, but I still wear, loose clothes. My daughter would not agree with me. She would want to wear Western clothes. And my mother, she doesn't observe parda usually. She wears sari, but then when she goes back to her in-laws place, she would take on burqa, right? My sister, who has recently, not recently, but after she moved to Johannesburg, and after a few years, all her life she did not, and then she suddenly took to hijab. So there are these variations, and we all are in the same family. So it is
Yeah.
so diverse. And how do you then unify or even expect to have this unitary, uniform, monological notion of identity? I think that's the very expectation is problematic. And when you said statist Islam, I mean, it's only about Iran. The situation of Iran is about Iran. Then we start looking at the Muslim women of the entire world through that lens. That is problematic. So I think there is a need to, revisit your assumptions with which you begin. And then probably the research can be more rational or more grounded, than otherwise you will end up with these notions that there are many Islams, because they refuse to identify could be for many reasons. I mean, just now Zohran Mamdani, in his speech, he said that I am a Muslim and I am not apologetic about it. He has to say this. The very reason that he needs to say this is because so many people have to be apologetic about it. Right? They have to come out in public domain and say that I'm not a Muslim, because the moment you say that you are a Muslim, you are typecast, you are seen in a certain way. Right? So I think these are the problems, these are the assumptions that you have to really come out of, and then the research can be more grounded.
Thank you very much for the comments.
Thank you, Professor Zaidi, and thank you, Professor Roja Fazaeli. Before we move on to more questions, I just want to quickly say that thank you, Professor Fazaeli, for a truly insightful and I would say a very useful plenary address on defining Muslim women, notes from the field on Iranian women's identity in the diaspora. Because all these while our technical sessions and even the keynote you mentioned, Cook, in your address, we've been looking at the theoretical construct of the Islamic feminist perspective and beliefs, going back to Amina Wadud, talking about Cook, and Asma Barles and others. But I think your plenary is very pertinent because now we are shifting towards the praxis. And, and especially I say useful because of your empirical insights that you have brought in from the field work, the Bilqis project, you have reminded us that the task of Islamic feminism is not just to critique, but also to build epistemologies and methodologies, that actually emerge from within our own lived tradition, existence, and intellectual tradition, So you also emphasized on relational, agency, the politics of naming, and on the decolonization of the methods. I think all this speaks very directly to the conference, and especially in building these new conceptual tools, which is part of your ongoing research project. And as Professor Zaidi also discussed, that the meaning, what is the meaning of being Muslim and Islam? It's constantly changing, and the ruptures that you also identified in your analysis, the anecdotes, from your field work. So also, interestingly, you foregrounded Islamic feminism, in the Iranian context. I think that is also very important, because you brought in Cook, and we had Professor Cook as a plenary, as a keynote, and where she had a very expansive and a very comprehensive discussion of what it means, what is Islamic feminism across time and space. So by bringing in the Iranian context, by agreeing and also disagreeing with her, I think you have brought in different trajectories of Islamic feminism in dialogue, which is very, very important, because it is also very, very nuanced, Now I just want to quickly move on to the question that Bilqis is one of the projects. It is based in Europe, right? But it engages with very transnational Islamic feminist, discourses. So how does this project foster this kind of collaboration across the culture, linguistic, theological context, because you have to avoid the homogenization, as you were discussing. So how does this, how does the methodological framework, how have you conceived this? If you can reflect a little bit on that.
Yes, and thank you for your generous introduction, your generous comments. So Belghis is a huge project, and the way that so basically what we are doing, I don't know how well I explained it in the presentation, is we are basically looking kind of from historical to modern, from the long 19th century, 20th century, with the Ottoman archives, Ottoman family archives. So we have a historian, Ottoman historian, working on the archives at the moment, and the archives to do with family law, so the sigils particularly, and we are looking to see kind of from historical to modern in the context of Bosnia, Bulgaria, and Greece, and then we come to modern Ireland, Norway, and Sweden. How Muslim women negotiated their own agency with power and authority. So that be it with the judge or with the mufti. As you know, you're probably familiar that, for example, in the Ottoman courts, sometimes actually women used to frequent Ottoman courts quite a lot, and sometimes they would go to the mufti, get a fatwa, and to support their case. So instead of basically looking at how Islamic laws discriminate against women, which is something like, I worked on as well, particularly when you look at women's movements and how they want to reform these laws, it's more kind of how women negotiate these spaces historically to modern. And then when we come to Ireland, Norway, and Sweden, I've explained kind of we are looking to see how Muslim women have again negotiated these different spaces. So, for example, if they want a divorce, do they go with the civil courts? Do they go to a mosque? Do they do both? Are there possibilities of doing both? For example, when it comes to mahr, is there any way of legally acquiring that? Even with marriage, because it could be that you don't even identify yourself, like in the Iranian case, as Muslim. But if you want to go back to Iran and you want to get married, first of all, you have to register that marriage within kind of the embassy or Islamic marriage. And then, for example, if there is a woman marrying a non-Muslim man, that under Iranian Islamic laws is not recognized. So what do they do? Like I know of cases in Ireland where the man just symbolically went and basically converted to Islam to be able to register so they can go back to Iran. So these are some of the questions that we are grappling with. And transnational Islam becomes really important, both in terms of religious authority, because when we look at religious authority, you're looking at everywhere, you're looking at kind of local religious authority, but more so transnational religious authority. Because so for example, in Ireland, if you look at kind of the imams in Ireland and where they're trained, like you have imam from Egypt who was trained in Al-Azhar. There is another imam from the Shia gathering place that was trained in the Hussein in Iran. And then there are some who've been trained more privately. So there is like less formal modes of religious authority as well. Yeah, to be honest, like it's really a massive project, but we have a lot of people working on it. So linguistically, for example, in Bosnia, we have a wonderful Germana Curik, who is now doing field work in Bosnia. For Greece, we have Moria Kokinu, who is Greek herself. So she has the linguistic competencies. Bulgaria, we are going to do through an interpreter. And then for Norway and Sweden, the only reason we started working on Iranian and Afghan kind of diaspora, or those who have links with Iran and Afghanistan, was because when we hired Tiba, Tiba is from Iran, Persian speaker, and we said actually it makes sense to work then for her on Iranian and Afghan diaspora there, because then she has the linguistic competence. And also the project is so huge that sometimes you need to concentrate on certain categories. Because the other thing as well is like, if talking about diversity, that when you are looking at the newer migrant communities in Norway, Ireland, and Sweden, it's so diverse, and each of these contexts bring, like, you have to know the context people coming from as well. So when we are looking at Iran and Afghanistan, we are looking at Islamic family laws. We need to know what the laws there are as well. So in some ways, like at the moment, we are trying to see, should we keep narrowing it down in some ways, but it's still it's huge. Like that's all I can say. We are 2 years in the project now, so there's 3 more years left, but we are hoping that we finish the field work this year so that we can start working on the outputs. Sorry, I hope I answered your question in a very long-winded way.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor.
Thank
I
you.
see this.
Yeah.
There is a question in the chat box also.
Yes. Thank you, Professor Fazaeli. A question, I was thinking about it. Given the evolution of the Islamic feminist discourse since the 1979 revolution, do you see the newer generations redefining the framework with digital activism or transnational dialogue that you are talking about and throughout the lecture that you talked about? Yeah.
It's a really good question. So definitely there is digital activism, but to what extent that transforms I suppose redefines identities within the context of Iran, I don't know how much power that has. But definitely there is there's more transnational dialogue than before because of these digital activism. To be honest, I'm not on social media because I find it I don't find it very I don't know, like very fulfilling in some ways. And I sometimes find these activisms on social media are shallower, and the way people attack each other as well, that it's more divisive than conducive. But definitely, like there are, like, for example, with the Me Too campaign, there was the push for the Me Too campaign in the Iranian context as well came similarly on the social media, and then it went basically to to Praxis. Actually, years ago, one of the very first papers I published was the offline consequences of online action. And this was about the webloggers in Iran. So at the time, there were webloggers in Iran who used to write kind of, criticisms of different kind of human rights violations and so on. And then there was a huge crackdown and they were arrested and so on. But they were from within. So that's kind of something that I am still grappling with myself as well, is, those who are outside Iran and those who are inside Iran. Because for example, during the Women Life Freedom movement, during the 2 years when the protests were happening, a group of us in Ireland came together and said, what can we do? And we said, we're outside of Iran, so we really need to listen to what's happening in Iran and what supports can we give them. Because sometimes what happens is activists outside try to impose their views on activists inside, whereas it should be the other way around.
Thank you, Professor. That was needed. I mean, your discussion on how Iranian women hold Islam as a vital part of their cultural and national identity is particularly engaging. And I mean, thank you so much, Professor Fazaeli, for giving us this time of yours. I mean, on behalf of all the participants in SNCWS, I extend my heartiest gratitude for sharing your scholarship and insight with such clarity and depth and such a deeply grounding lecture. It was a privilege to listen to you, Professor, and I'm sure that your reflections are going to inspire the further dialogues on the way forward in the Islamic feminist context. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, and I hope we can continue some of these conversations. I really enjoyed this conversation, and you gave some food for thought as well. So thank you very much. Bye.
Of course, as long as your YouTube videos are on point.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Look forward to the outcome of your project.
Absolutely. Yes, we do look forward to the project, the ongoing projects.
Yes. Thank you. And I'll keep in touch for sure.
Please do.
Thank you, Professor.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
What now?
We'll have to leave now.
There's a lunch break or